in which humanity proves, once again, that we're the galaxy's most lovable psychopaths. Captain Zix Nath of the Galactic Federation Navy massaged his throbbing head tentacles as he stared at the holographic battle map. The pulsing red dot representing the enemy stronghold on Novus 9 seemed to mock him, its stubborn presence a constant reminder of his 6-month failure. The stark blue glow of the hologram cast eerie shadows across the bridge, highlighting the exhaustion etched on every alien face present. Another day, another migraine, he muttered to his second-in-command, Commander Krell. I swear, if I have to look at this map for one more rotation cycle, I'm going to stuff myself out an airlock. Krell, a tall, willowy creature with iridescent scales that shifted colors with his mood, managed a weak chuckle. His scales currently displayed a muted palette of grays and blues, reflecting the somber atmosphere on the bridge. Now, Captain. Suicide is hardly the answer, though I must admit, the sweet embrace of the void is looking more appealing by the day. Their shared gallows humor was interrupted by a chirping alert from the communications console. A young ensign, practically vibrating with excitement, turned to address them. The ensign's youthful enthusiasm stood in stark contrast to the weariness permeating the rest of the crew. Sirs, incoming transmission from Galactic Command. Zix Nath groaned, all 4 of his hearts sinking simultaneously. Wonderful. Another stern talking to from the admirals about our stunning lack of progress. Put them through, ensign. Let's get this over with. The holographic display flickered, the battle map dissolving into static before being replaced by the imposing figure of Admiral K. Thax. The Admiral's multiple eyes narrowed in what passed for a frown among his species, tentacles writhing with barely contained frustration. Captain Zix Nath, the Admiral's voice boomed, filling the bridge with its resonant tones. I trust you have good news regarding the siege of Novus 9. Zix Nath forced a smile, all 4 of his mouths twitching uncomfortably. Well, Admiral, if by good news you mean we haven't been obliterated yet, then yes, I have excellent news. The Admiral's eyes narrowed further, a feat Zix Nath wouldn't have thought possible. The temperature on the bridge seemed to drop several degrees, and Krell's scales shifted to a sickly green. Your attempts at humor are as ineffective as your siege tactics, Captain K. Thax growled. This situation has become untenable. The Galactic Council is breathing down my tentacles, demanding results. With all due respect, Admiral. Zix Nath began, a phrase universally recognized across the galaxy as preceding something not respectful at all. We've thrown everything we have at that fortress. Heavy artillery, orbital bombardment, chemical warfare, heck. We even tried psychological tactics. Do you know how hard it is to find therapists willing to work in an active war zone? Admiral K. Thax's expression didn't change, but the hologram seemed to loom larger, filling more of the bridge with his disapproving presence. I'm well aware of your creative approaches, Captain. However, the fact remains that a ragtag group of pirates and smugglers has managed to hold off the might of the Galactic Federation for half a standard year. It's embarrassing. Zix Nath felt a surge of defensive anger, his tentacles curling into tight knots. Those ragtag pirates are dug in deeper than a Terran tick on a Gorflaxian blood beast. Their shields can withstand a supernova, and their weapon systems. Well, let's just say I've lost count of how many ships we've had to scrape off the planet's surface. The Admiral's tentacles writhed in agitation, their movements becoming more erratic. Enough excuses. I'm sending you reinforcements. A special team that should be able to break this stalemate. Zix Nath perked up at this, hope blossoming in his chest cavity. Perhaps a crack team of Andromean assassins? Or maybe some of those terrifying Vorlax berserkers? His hopes were quickly dashed. I'm assigning you a squad of Terran cadets, the Admiral announced, his tone suggesting he was delivering a great boon rather than a potential catastrophe. The bridge fell silent, save for the muffled sound of Commander Krell choking on his nutrient paste. The ensign at the communications console let out a small squeak of surprise before clamping all 3 of her hands over her mouth apertures. I'm sorry, Admiral Zix Nath said slowly, certain he had misheard. Did you say Terran cadets? As in humans? As in those crazy Deathworlders who think wrestling with apex predators is a fun weekend activity? Precisely, Admiral K. Thax replied, a hint of amusement creeping into his voice. They're fresh out of their academy, eager to prove themselves. And more importantly, they've volunteered for this mission. Zix Nath exchanged a look of pure disbelief with Krell, whose scales had now taken on a mottled pattern that screamed existential crisis. They volunteered. Are they insane? Quite possibly, the Admiral said, and Zixnath could have sworn he saw the ghost of a smile flicker across the old warrior's face. But they're also our best shot at ending this siege. The transport carrying the Terran squad will arrive within the next solar day. I suggest you prepare yourselves, Captain. Terrans can be intense. With that ominous warning, the transmission cut off, leaving the bridge crew in stunned silence. The only sound was the soft hum of the ship's systems and the occasional whimper from the communications ensign. Zixnath slumped in his command chair, all four of his hearts racing. Terrans, he whispered, the word hanging in the air like a prophecy of doom. They're sending us Terrans. Commander Krell, having finally regained his composure, approached the captain. His scales had settled into a nervous pattern of swirling purples and greens. Sir, if I may, perhaps this isn't such a bad thing? I've heard stories about human ingenuity in combat situations. Oh, I've heard the stories too, Krell Zixnath said, his voice a mix of awe and terror. Like the time a single human miner held off an entire Draxi invasion force with nothing but a plasma drill and a crate of expired protein bars. Krell's scales flickered in confusion, a ripple of doubt passing through their iridescent surface. I don't think that's an actual story, sir. Doesn't matter. Zixnath waved a tentacle dismissively, nearly knocking over a nearby data pad. The point is, humans are unpredictable, chaotic. They look at the laws of physics as more of a polite suggestion than an actual rule. So, you're saying they might actually succeed where we've failed? Krell asked, a glimmer of hope in his multifaceted eyes. Zixnath let out a long sigh that seemed to deflate his entire body. I'm saying, Commander, that by this time tomorrow, we'll either be celebrating the end of this blasted siege, or we'll be picking up pieces of our own ships from orbit. He turned to address the rest of the bridge crew, who had been pretending not to eavesdrop on the conversation. Their attempts at nonchalance were somewhat undermined by the fact that several of them had extrasensory organs swiveled in the direction of the command chair. All right, everyone. We've got less than a day to prepare for the arrival of our human reinforcements. I want this ship spotless, all systems at peak efficiency, and for the love of the cosmic egg, hide all the caffeine. As the crew scrambled to comply with his orders, Zixnath couldn't shake the feeling that his life was about to get a lot more interesting. And in his experience, interesting usually meant dangerous, explosive, or both. The next 24 hours passed in a flurry of activity. The Federation battlecruiser Indomitable Spirit, a name Zixnath found increasingly ironic with each passing day, was scrubbed from stem to stern. Weapon systems were recalibrated, shield generators fine-tuned, and every scrap of intelligence on the pirate stronghold was reviewed for the umpteenth time. Through it all, Zixnath found himself oscillating between hope and dread. The stories of human military prowess were legendary throughout the galaxy. Their adaptability, their tenacity, their sheer bloody-mindedness in the face of overwhelming odds, all of it spoke to a species that simply refused to accept defeat as an option. But these weren't seasoned human veterans. These were cadets, hatchlings, barely out of their education pods. What could they possibly bring to the table that his experienced crew hadn't already tried? As the appointed time for the Terran's arrival drew near, Zixnath stood on the bridge, trying to project an aura of calm confidence. The effect was somewhat ruined by the nervous twitching of his tentacles and the fact that he'd stress molted twice in the past day. Status report, he barked, more to break the tension than out of any real need for information. Krell, ever dutiful, responded immediately. All systems nominal, sir. Long-range scanners are clear. No sign of the Terran transport yet. Zixnath nodded, his eye stalks swiveling to take in the tense faces of his crew. Remember, he said, raising his voice to address them all, these humans are our allies. They may have unconventional methods, but they're here to help. Let's give them a proper Galactic Federation welcome. A chorus of half-hearted affirmations echoed across the bridge. Zixnath was about to launch into another morale-boosting speech when the sensor officer's console erupted in a cacophony of alerts. Sir, the officer cried, her tendrils flailing in alarm. Unidentified vessel dropping out of hyperspace. It's coming in hot. Zixnath's heart leapt into his throat. On screen. Now. The main view screen flickered to life, revealing a scene that would haunt Zixnath's nightmares for cycles to come. The Terran transport ship dropped out of hyperspace with all the grace of a drunken Gorbelian space whale, nearly clipping one of the Federation cruisers in the process. It tumbled end over end, trailing a comet's tail of debris and what looked suspiciously like someone's underwear. By the cosmic egg, Zix Nath muttered, watching the approaching vessel with a mix of horror and morbid fascination. Do they not teach basic flight protocols at the Terran Academy? Commander Krell, standing rigidly at attention beside him, cleared his throat. His scales had taken on a sickly yellow hue. Actually, sir, I believe that was a textbook example of a combat drop. The erratic approach is meant to confuse enemy targeting systems. Zix Nath blinked all 6 of his eyes in rapid succession, turning to stare at his second-in-command. We're not the enemy, Krell. Perhaps they're just very committed to their training exercises, Krell offered weakly, his scales rippling with uncertainty. Before Zix Nath could respond, the communications officer announced an incoming transmission from the Terran ship. With a resigned sigh that seemed to come from the very depths of his soul, the captain nodded for it to be put through. The view screen flickered to life, revealing the interior of the Terran vessel. Zix Nath had expected to see a grizzled veteran, perhaps sporting one of those fascinating facial hair growths humans seem so fond of. Instead, he found himself face to face with what appeared to be a Terran youngling, barely out of its larval stage. Greetings, Captain Zix Nath, the human chirped, its voice far too cheerful for someone who had just performed interstellar acrobatics. Lieutenant Alex Chen, leader of Fire Team Omega, reporting for duty. Zix Nath stared at the human, trying to reconcile its youthful appearance with its apparent military rank. The creature looked like it should be learning basic algebra, not leading combat missions. Lieutenant, he began carefully, forgive my confusion, but how old are you? The human's face scrunched up in what Zix Nath recognized as their thinking expression. It was disturbingly similar to the face his own offspring made when trying to solve particularly difficult math problems. Well, sir, in Terran Standard years, I'm 22, but I think that translates to about 3.5 galactic standard cycles. A collective gasp went up from the bridge crew. Krell swayed on his feet, looking as though he might faint. His scales had turned a pale, ghostly white. 3.5. You're an infant, Zix Nath sputtered, his tentacles flailing in disbelief. Surely there's been some mistake. The Admiral promised us trained soldiers, not. Kick-ass space cadets. Another human popped into view, this one sporting a wild mane of red head fur that seemed to defy the laws of gravity. Corporal Mackenzie O'Brien, at your service. Don't let our age fool you, Captain. We may be young, but we've got more combat training than a Vex Tari battle monk on a caffeine binge. Zix Nath felt a headache building behind all 6 of his eyes. He made a mental note to requisition stronger pain medication from the medical bay. That's reassuring, he lied, wondering if it was too late to take up Commander Krell's earlier suggestion of stuffing himself out an airlock. Perhaps you'd like to come aboard, and we can discuss the tactical situation. No need for that, Sir Lieutenant Chen replied, his grin growing impossibly wider. Zix Nath found himself wondering if human facial muscles were somehow exempt from the normal laws of biology. We've already reviewed the intel, and we've got a plan of attack ready to go. Just give us the green light, and we'll have that pirate stronghold cracked open faster than you can say humanity, fuck yeah. The bridge fell silent once more, every alien present trying to process the sheer audacity of these Terran younglings. Zix Nath was vaguely aware of the sound of Krell hyperventilating beside him. You, what Zix Nath stammered, his usually eloquent command of language deserting him. You can't possibly. We've been besieging this fortress for 6 months. 6 months, O'Brien scoffed, tossing her fiery mane. No offense, Captain, but that sounds like 5 months and 29 days too long. We'll have this wrapped up in time for dinner. Hope you guys like mores. Before Zix Nath could formulate a response, or possibly just scream incoherently into the void, a third human squeezed into view. This one was built like a Jovian freight hauler, with arms that looked capable of bench pressing a small moon. Zix Nath found himself wondering if the Terrans had somehow managed to breed with sentient battle tanks. Don't mind these 2 show-offs, so the new human rumbled, his voice deep enough to make the view screen vibrate. Sergeant Darius Washington, I'll keep these pups in line. But they're right about one thing: we're ready to roll whenever you give the word. Zix Nath looked to Krell, hoping his second-in-command might have some words of wisdom. The commander merely shrugged, his scales shifting to a pale shade of "I have no idea what's happening" anymore green. With a deep sigh that seemed to come from the very core of his being, Zix-Nath turned back to the eager human faces on the screen. "Very well," he said, resigning himself to whatever chaos was about to unfold. "You have my authorization to proceed with your plan. May the cosmic egg have mercy on us all," his outstanding Lieutenant Chen exclaimed, pumping his fist in a gesture that Zix-Nath vaguely recognized as a sign of human triumph. "All right, Fire Team Omega, you heard the captain. Let's go introduce these pirates to the business end of Terran ingenuity." The transmission cut off, leaving the alien bridge crew in a state of stunned disbelief. For a moment, the only sound was the soft hum of the ship's systems and what might have been Krell quietly whimpering. Sir Krell ventured after a long moment of silence, his voice barely above a whisper. "Should we prepare the medical bay?" Zix-Nath shook his head, all four of his hearts heavy with resignation. "Prepare the medical bay, the brig, and the ship's therapist. Something tells me we're going to need all three before this day is over." As the crew scrambled to carry out his orders, Zix-Nath turned his attention back to the main view screen. The Terran transport ship had stabilized its erratic flight path and was now making a beeline for the planet's surface. It streaked through the atmosphere like a meteor, leaving a trail of superheated plasma in its wake. "They're going to crash," Krell muttered, his scales shifting to a sickly green. "We should ready the rescue teams." His words were cut off as the ship suddenly pulled up, bleeding off speed at a rate that should have turned its occupants into organic paste. It skimmed along the planet's surface, heading straight for the pirate stronghold. "Impossible," the sensor officer breathed, her tendrils twitching in disbelief. "The G-forces alone should have—" "Let me guess," Zix-Nath interrupted, feeling a headache building behind his eye stalks. "Our scans show that the humans are not only alive but probably whooping and hollering like maniacs." The sensor officer nodded mutely. Of course they are, Zix-Nath sighed. Because why would the laws of physics apply to Terrans? The bridge crew watched in horrified fascination as the human ship approached the pirate fortress. The massive energy shields that had repelled 6 months of bombardment shimmered in the planet's harsh sunlight, an impenetrable barrier that had been the bane of Zix-Nath's existence. "They're not slowing down," Krell observed, his voice tight with tension. "Surely they don't intend to." His words were lost in a collective gasp as the Terran ship did the impossible. Instead of splattering against the shields like so many Federation vessels before it, the human craft phased through the energy barrier. It flickered like a bad hologram, its atomic structure seeming to vibrate at impossible speeds before solidifying on the other side. "How in the name of the cosmic egg's left tentacle did they do that?" Zix-Nath demanded, his eyes bulging so far they threatened to pop out of his skull. The sensor officer, a Valaxian with an impressively stoic demeanor, cleared her throat. "Preliminary analysis suggests they vibrated their ship's atomic structure at the exact frequency of the shield harmonics, sir." "They what?" "It appears they turned their entire vessel into a tuning fork," Captain the officer elaborated, sounding as though she couldn't quite believe her own words. "A very large, very explosive tuning fork." Before Zix-Nath could fully process this information, the tactical display lit up with new activity. The 3 human figures they'd spoken to earlier emerged from the wreckage of their ship, seemingly unscathed. "Impossible," Krell breathed, his scales flickering through a rainbow of confused colors. No one could have survived that crash. Yet not only had the humans survived, but they were now charging towards the fortress with reckless abandon. Lieutenant Chen led the way, wielding what appeared to be a modified mining laser with all the enthusiasm of a child with a new toy. Corporal O'Brien followed close behind, her arms laden with an assortment of devices that looked more like jury-rigged kitchen appliances than proper weapons. Bringing up the rear was Sergeant Washington, and the sight of him nearly caused Zix-Nath to swallow his own tongue. The massive human was carrying what could only be described as a portable mass-driver cannon, a weapon typically mounted on capital ships. How is he even lifting that thing?" Zix-Nath sputtered, wondering if perhaps he had finally snapped, and this was all some sort of stress-induced hallucination. Krell, having apparently given up on understanding the situation, merely shrugged. "Terran physiology, sir. I've heard they can achieve feats of strength that defy explanation when under duress. although I suspect liberal use of performance-enhancing stimulants may also be involved. The three humans reached the fortress walls, and what happened next could only be described as choreographed chaos. Lieutenant Chen's mining laser carved through the reinforced durasteel like it was made of soft cheese, while Corporal O'Brien gleefully tossed her homemade explosives through the newly created openings. Sergeant Washington, meanwhile, seemed content to simply point his oversized cannon at anything that looked important and pull the trigger. Each earth-shattering blast left smoking craters where gun emplacements and sensor arrays had once stood. Captain, the sensor officer called out, her voice tinged with disbelief. I'm detecting multiple hull breaches throughout the fortress. Life support systems are failing, and their main reactor is showing signs of instability. Zix-Nath could only watch in stunned silence as 6 months of careful siege were undone in a matter of minutes by 3 overeager human cadets. Inside the fortress, alarms blared and pirates scrambled in panic. The Terran assault had caught them completely off guard after all. Who would expect a frontal assault against a fortress that had withstood months of bombardment? Lieutenant Chen's voice crackled over the comm system, sounding entirely too cheerful for someone in the middle of a war zone. Fire Team Omega to Captain Zix-Nath. We've breached the main control room. You might want to prepare your boarding parties. We've got a bunch of very confused pirates here who seem eager to surrender. There was a muffled explosion in the background, followed by what sounded suspiciously like maniacal laughter from Corporal O'Brien. Oh, and Sir Chen added, almost as an afterthought, you might want to have your medical team standing by. We may have gotten a little carried away with the property damage. The transmission cut off, leaving the bridge in stunned silence once more. Krell turned to Zix-Nath, his scales shifting through a kaleidoscope of confused colors. Sir, your orders. Zix-Nath blinked rapidly, his multiple eyes struggling to focus. Yes, orders. Right, he shook himself, tentacles quivering. Prepare boarding parties, and someone get me a drink. Preferably something strong enough to make me forget the last 10 minutes of my life. As the crew scrambled to comply, Zix-Nath slumped in his chair, massaging his throbbing head tentacles. 6 months, he muttered. 6 months of careful planning, precise calculations, and meticulous execution. All undone by 3 human children with the combined survival instinct of a Zygerian lemming. To be fair, Sir Krell offered hesitantly, Zygerian lemmings are known for their tenacity in the face of certain doom. Zix-Nath fixed his second-in-command with a baleful glare, not helping Krell. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Boarding parties secured the fortress, rounding up shell-shocked pirates who seemed more than eager to surrender. Medical teams treated a surprising number of non-life-threatening injuries, mostly consisting of stubbed appendages and ringing ear analogues. Through it all, Fire Team Omega strutted about the captured stronghold like conquering heroes, regaling anyone who would listen, and many who would prefer not to, with tales of their daring assault. ... And then I said, looks like you boys picked the wrong day to skip physics class. Lieutenant Chen's voice carried down the corridor as Zix-Nath approached the main control room. The humans' audience, a mix of Federation troops and captured pirates, responded with a chorus of confused murmurs and nervous laughter. Zix-Nath entered the room just in time to see Corporal O'Brien demonstrating what appeared to be an improvised grappling hook fashioned from a belt, a plasma cutter, and what might have once been a toaster. Captain on deck Sergeant Washington's booming voice cut through the chatter, and everyone snapped to attention even, somewhat bewilderingly, the pirates. At ease, Zix-Nath said, waving a tentacle wearily. He fixed the 3 humans with a stare that had made hardened criminals confess to crimes they hadn't even committed. Lieutenant Chen, I believe you and your team owe me an explanation. Chen's grin, if anything, grew even wider. Of course, sir. What would you like to know? The part where we recalibrated our ship's shields to match the fortress's harmonic frequency, or maybe how we repurposed the galley's microwave emitter into a localized EMP device. Perhaps, Zix-Nath said, struggling to keep his voice even, you could start by explaining how 3 freshly graduated cadets managed to accomplish in less than an hour what an entire Federation fleet couldn't do in 6 months. The humans exchanged glances, a silent conversation passing between them in the span of a heartbeat. It was Sergeant Washington who finally spoke up, his deep voice rumbling like distant thunder. With all due respect, sir, he began, and Zix-Nath braced himself for whatever madness was about to follow. You all were thinking like soldiers. We thought like students pulling an all-nighter before a big exam. Zix-Nath blinked. I don't follow. Corporal O'Brien jumped in, her words tumbling out in an excited rush. It's simple, Cap. When you've got 12 hours to cram a semester's worth of quantum mechanics into your brain, you learn to get creative, to bend the rules a little, or a lot. Sometimes you even break EM, but only if you're sure you can put EM back together before the professor notices. What my eloquent colleagues are trying to say, Lieutenant Chen added, his tone taking on a more serious note, is that sometimes the most elegant solution isn't the most obvious one. You spent months trying to crack this fortress like a tough nut. We just found a way to make the nut crack itself. Zix-Nath stared at the three humans, his mind reeling. But the risks, the sheer improbability of success. Improbable. Washington chuckled, the sound reminiscent of gravel in a cement mixer. Sir, have you met humanity? We eat improbable for breakfast and wash it down with a tall glass of impossible for good measure. It's true, O'Brien chimed in. Did you know the first time we achieved powered flight, we did it with basically a bicycle with wings, and less than 70 years later, we were walking on our moon. Improbable is our middle name. I thought your middle name was Danger, Chen quipped. Nah, that's just on weekends, O'Brien shot back with a wink. Zix-Nath held up a tentacle, silencing the banter. Let me see if I understand this correctly. You succeeded where we failed, because you didn't know it was supposed to be impossible. The three humans nodded enthusiastically, and your strategy was based on last-minute exam preparation techniques, more nodding, accompanied by grins that threatened to split their faces in two. Zix-Nath turned to Krell, who had been hovering silently at his side. Commander, make a note. From now on, all Federation tactical manuals are to be rewritten by sleep-deprived university students hopped up on caffeine and desperation. Krell blinked rapidly. Sir, are you feeling all right? Never better, Krell. Zix-Nath replied, a strange calm settling over him. I've simply realized that the universe is far more absurd than we ever gave it credit for, and the sooner we embrace that absurdity, the better off we'll all be. He turned back to Fireteam Omega, who were watching the exchange with barely contained amusement. Well done, you three. I'll be sure to include your unorthodox methods in my report to Admiral Kathax. I'm sure he'll be thrilled to learn that the future of galactic warfare apparently lies in the hands of caffeinate human younglings with a blatant disregard for the laws of physics. Chen saluted smartly, though the effect was somewhat ruined by the mischievous twinkle in his eyes. Thank you, sir. We aim to please, and occasionally to explode things in interesting and educational ways. Just out of curiosity, Zix-Nath ventured, already suspecting he'd regret asking, what would you have done if your initial assault hadn't succeeded? The three humans exchanged another one of those lightning-fast glances. Well, O'Brien began, rocking back on her heels, we did have a plan B, and a plan C, and I think we got all the way to plan Q before we ran out of letters. Plan Q, Krell echoed faintly. Washington nodded solemnly. It involved 3 rubber bands, a toothbrush, and enough hot sauce to make a Venusian fire slug cry uncle. Trust me, sir, you don't want to know the details. Zix-Nath decided then and there that he'd had quite enough revelations for one day. Very well. I'll expect your full report, all 26 plans included, on my desk by 0800 tomorrow. In the meantime, I suggest you all get some rest. I have a feeling the Admiral will want to speak with you personally once word of this reaches Galactic Command. As the humans saluted and turned to leave, chattering excitedly among themselves, Zix-Nath couldn't shake the feeling that the galaxy had just become a much more interesting and terrifying place. Krell, he said softly, watching the retreating forms of Fireteam Omega. Yes, Captain. I think I'm going to need that drink now. And perhaps it's time I put in for a nice, quiet desk job, somewhere far, far away from any Terran combat zones. Krell's scales rippled in silent agreement. I hear the Oort Cloud monitoring station is lovely this time of year, sir. As they left the control room, the sound of human laughter echoed down the corridors of the captured fortress. It was a sound that would soon be heard across the galaxy, the laughter of a species that looked at the impossible and saw only a challenge to be overcome, preferably with duct tape, WD-40, and a healthy dose of what they called hold my beer and watch this spirit. The Galactic Federation would never be the same again. And somewhere, in the vast cosmic tapestry, The cosmic egg chuckled to itself, wondering what other surprises its newest children would come up with next. Epilogue. 3 cycles later, the Galactic Federation Naval Academy introduced a new required course for all officer candidates, human-inspired tactical improvisation and creative problem-solving. The course syllabus included such topics as weaponizing household appliances, advanced caffeine utilization in combat scenarios, and ethics of bending fundamental physical laws. Fireteam Omega, much to the chagrin of the Federation's more traditional military leaders, became something of a legend. Their exploits were whispered about in the halls of the Academy, each retelling more outrageous than the last. As for Captain Zix Nath, he did indeed transfer to the Oort Cloud Monitoring Station. There, he found a peaceful retirement cataloguing comets and ice fragments, far from the chaos of the front lines. However, on quiet nights, when the stars shone particularly bright, he would sometimes find himself missing the sheer audacity and brilliance of his human charges. And if, occasionally, he used some of their unorthodox problem-solving techniques to deal with the station's more mundane issues, well, who could blame him? After all, once you've seen a fortress fall to a repurposed toaster and some creative thinking, it's hard to look at the universe the same way again. Meanwhile, back at Galactic Command, Admiral K. Thax stared at the report in front of him, his multiple eyes blinking in rapid succession, as if trying to clear away some sort of hallucination. He'd read it 3 times now, and it still didn't make any sense. Vibrated their ship's atomic structure, recalibrated a mining laser, weaponized a microwave, he muttered, tentacles twitching in bewilderment. And they did all this in under an hour. His aide, a young Zorblaxian with an impressive array of sensory appendages, nodded enthusiastically. Yes, sir. The humans are calling it the Novus 9 miracle. It's already becoming something of a legend in the lower ranks. K. Thax leaned back in his chair, which adjusted automatically to support his non-humanoid frame. A legend, you say? And what do our more traditional officers think of this? The aide's color-changing skin flickered through a series of nervous patterns. Well, sir, opinions are divided. Some are calling for the immediate integration of human tactics into our standard procedures. Others are demanding we quarantine Earth and pretend we never made contact. The Admiral chuckled. A sound like gravel in a cement mixer. Let me guess which camp Rear Admiral Zix Thor falls into. He's actually leading the quarantine movement, Sir, the aide confirmed. Says the humans are, and I quote, a menace to the proper order of the universe and an affront to the sacred laws of physics. K. Thax waved a dismissive tentacle. Zix Thor wouldn't know innovation if it bit him on his primary photoreceptor. No, we can't ignore this. The humans have shown us something important here, even if I'm not entirely sure what it is yet. He turned to face the large view screen that dominated one wall of his office. With a series of precise gestures, he brought up the personnel files of Fireteam Omega. The 3 young human faces stared back at him, their expressions a mix of confidence and barely contained mischief. Tell me, K. Thax said, addressing his aide without turning around, what do you know about human educational institutions? The aide's skin rippled in surprise at the unexpected question. Not much, sir. I know they have a variety of them, ranging from basic knowledge acquisition centers to advanced research facilities. K. Thax nodded slowly. And these universities they're responsible for producing minds like these. He gestured to the images of Chen, O'Brien, and Washington. I believe so, sir. Although from what I understand, much of their unique problem-solving style comes from extracurricular activities and something called dorm life. The Admiral's tentacles curled thoughtfully. Interesting. Very interesting indeed. He was quiet for a long moment, lost in thought. When he spoke again, there was a note of determination in his voice. I want you to set up a meeting with the Galactic Education Board and get me a direct line to the human ambassador. The aide's skin flashed a pattern of confusion and alarm. Sir, what are you planning? K. Thax turned back to face his subordinate, all 4 of his mouths curved into what passed for a smile among his species. Why, my dear Zorb, I'm planning to revolutionize the Federation's entire approach to military training. If 3 human cadets can do what an entire fleet couldn't, imagine what we could accomplish if we applied their methods on a galactic scale. The aide's eyes widened in a mix of awe and terror. You mean? Exactly, K. Thax confirmed. We're going to build a human-style university right here in the heart of Federation space. A place where the brightest minds from every species can come together to learn, innovate, and hopefully not blow up too many solar systems in the process. As his aide scurried off to make the necessary arrangements, Admiral K-Thax turned back to the view screen. He studied the faces of Fireteam Omega, these young humans who had turned the galaxy on its head without even realizing it. "Well, little Deathworlders," he murmured, "you wanted to make your mark on the universe. I don't think you realize just how big that mark is going to be." 6 months later, on a previously unremarkable planet in the Orion Arm, the inauguration ceremony for the Galactic Advanced Research and Development Institute GARDI was a spectacle unlike anything the Federation had seen before. Representatives from hundreds of species crowded the massive auditorium, their diverse forms creating a living tapestry of galactic life. At the center of it all stood Fireteam Omega, looking simultaneously proud and bewildered. They had been chosen as the human representatives for this momentous occasion, a decision that had caused no small amount of controversy among the more traditional elements of both human and alien society. As Admiral K-Thax approached the podium to give his opening speech, Lieutenant Chen leaned over to whisper to his teammates, "Did either of you ever think that accidentally exploding a microwave would lead to?" Corporal O'Brien grinned, her red hair somehow even wilder than usual. "Nope. But I'm not complaining. Think of all the new aliens we get to confuse and terrify." Sergeant Washington rolled his eyes, but there was a hint of a smile on his usually stoic face. "Just remember, we're here as representatives of Earth. Try not to start any interstellar incidents, okay?" "No promises," O'Brien whispered back, her eyes gleaming with mischief. Their banter was cut short as Admiral K-Thax began to speak, his booming voice filling the auditorium. "Esteemed colleagues, honored guests, sentients of all species," he began, his tentacles gesticulating in what the humans had learned was a sign of great emotion. "We stand here today on the cusp of a new era for the Galactic Federation. An era of innovation, of pushing boundaries, and yes, occasionally of bending the laws of physics until they cry uncle." A ripple of confused murmurs went through the crowd at this last statement. The human contingent, however, broke into enthusiastic applause. K-Thax continued, warming to his theme. "For too long, we have approached the challenges of the universe with rigid thinking and inflexible methodologies. We have allowed ourselves to be constrained by what we believe to be possible. Rather than asking ourselves what could be possible if we just approached problems from a different angle." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the assembled dignitaries before settling on Fireteam Omega. "It took the actions of 3 young humans, fresh from their academy, to show us the error of our ways. In a single hour, they accomplished what months of traditional siege warfare could not. And they did it with nothing more than ingenuity, courage, and a blatant disregard for the impossible." Chen, O'Brien, and Washington straightened up, trying to look suitably heroic and not at all like they were suppressing grins. "That is why we have gathered here today," K-Thax declared, "to inaugurate the Galactic Advanced Research and Development Institute. A place where the brightest minds from across the Federation can come together, share ideas, and hopefully revolutionize our approach to everything from military strategy to waste management." He gestured grandly to the gleaming buildings behind him, a sprawling campus that looked like a cross between a university, a high-tech research facility, and something out of a fever dream. "Within these walls, we will foster an environment of creative problem-solving, cross-species collaboration, and controlled chaos. We will learn from each other, challenge each other, and together push the boundaries of what we thought possible." The Admiral's voice took on a note of wry humor. "I should note that the Institute's insurance premiums are astronomical, and we've had to designate several uninhabited solar systems as test areas, but I believe the potential benefits far outweigh the risks." This elicited a few nervous laughs from the audience, particularly from those who had read the fine print on their invitation regarding acceptable collateral damage. "And now," K-Thax said, his tone becoming more formal, "it is my great pleasure to introduce our first class of students and researchers. They represent the best and brightest from across the Federation, chosen for their innovative thinking, adaptability, and willingness to question established norms." As he began to read off names, a diverse group of beings made their way to the stage. There were towering crystalline entities, amorphous blob-like creatures, and everything in between. Each wore some variation of the Institute's uniform, adapted to their unique physiologies. And finally, K-Thax announced, serving as special advisors and guest lecturers, the humans who inspired this entire endeavor: Lieutenant Alex Chen, Corporal Mackenzie O'Brien, and Sergeant Darius Washington of Fire Team Omega. The three humans stepped forward, waving to the crowd. The applause was enthusiastic, if somewhat tentative from certain sections. As they took their places among the other students and faculty, Chen couldn't help but whisper to his teammates, "You realize this is probably going to end in either galactic peace or the accidental creation of a black hole, right?" O'Brien grinned. "Why not both? I bet we could weaponize peace if we tried hard enough." Washington sighed. "And this, ladies and gentlemen, is why I drink." The ceremony continued, with various dignitaries giving speeches about the bright future ahead. But it was the final words of Admiral K. Thax that would be remembered and quoted for years to come. "To the stars we look for inspiration, to each other we turn for strength, and to the humans we now turn when we need someone to hold our beverages and watch this." The human contingent erupted in cheers, while the rest of the audience looked on in confused silence. It was, many would later agree, a perfect encapsulation of the cultural divide that Gardi hoped to bridge. As the inaugural class of Gardi settled into their new routines, it quickly became apparent that bringing together the galaxy's most innovative minds was going to be interesting, to say the least. Within the first week, the physics department had to be evacuated due to what was officially termed a localized breakdown of causality. The biology labs reported the spontaneous evolution of a new life form in the forgotten leftovers of the cafeteria refrigerator. And the engineering students managed to create a perpetual motion machine, only to dismantle it because it was, in their words, boring once you figure it out. Fire Team Omega found themselves at the center of it all, alternating between guest lectures, impromptu problem-solving sessions, and occasionally talking students down from potentially universe-ending experiments. "You know," Chen mused one evening, as they watched the cleanup of yet another spectacularly failed, or perhaps succeeded experiment, "I'm starting to think we might have been a bad influence on the galaxy." O'Brien snorted, her hands busy tinkering with what looked like a cross between a toaster and a small particle accelerator. "Bad influence? We're the best thing that ever happened to these guys. Look at them, actually enjoying science instead of just memorizing equations." Washington, who had taken to carrying a fire extinguisher everywhere, just in case, nodded in agreement. "It's chaos, sure, but it's productive chaos. I overheard some Volaxian physicists earlier talking about rewriting quantum theory based on a joke you made, Chen." "I was sleep-deprived and caffeine-addled," Chen protested. "I didn't think anyone would take Schrodinger's cat, but the box is made of lasagna seriously." And yet came a familiar voice from behind them. "That very concept has led to a breakthrough in quantum entanglement theory that our top scientists are still trying to fully understand." The three humans turned to see Admiral K. Thax approaching. His tentacles swaying in what they had learned was an expression of amused satisfaction. "Admiral," they snapped to attention, or at least as close to attention as O'Brien could manage while still fiddling with her contraption. K. Thax waved a tentacle dismissively. "At ease. This isn't a military installation, after all. It's a place of learning, exploration, and occasional reality-bending mishaps." He gazed out over the campus, where students and faculty of all species mingled, argued, and collaborated. "I must admit, when I first proposed this idea, I had my doubts. Many thought I was insane, letting loose a bunch of humans and their wild ideas on the unsuspecting galaxy." "And now?" Sir Chen asked, curious despite himself. K. Thax's full mouths curved into a smile. Now I think it might be the best decision I've ever made. Yes, we've had our share of incidents. The transdimensional coffee maker in the faculty lounge is still causing temporal hiccups, and I'm told we've accidentally created at least 3 new forms of math. But look at them." He gestured to a nearby group of students, a willowy Aldebaranian, a crystalline Trixian, and a gelatinous blob from Betelgeuse, who were engaged in a heated debate over the best way to achieve faster-than-light travel using nothing but rubber bands and positive thinking. "They're not just learning facts and figures," K. Thax continued. "They're learning how to think differently, how to approach problems from new angles. They're learning to embrace the chaos and find the opportunities hidden within it." O'Brien looked up from her device, a rare expression of seriousness on her face. "That's what we were trying to do back on Novus 9, We didn't have time to do things the right way, so we had to get creative." Washington nodded. "In a real fight, the enemy doesn't care about your carefully laid plans or your by-the-book strategies. You have to be able to adapt, to think on your feet. and occasionally throw physics out the window, Chen added with a grin. K-Thax let out a rumbling laugh. Precisely. And that, my young friends, is what we're hoping to instill in the next generation of Federation leaders, scientists, and problem solvers. He turned to face the three humans directly, his expression becoming more serious. I know your tour of duty here is coming to an end soon. The Federation Navy is eager to have you back, to see how your experiences here can be applied in the field. But I want you to know that what you've started here, it's going to change the galaxy. The members of Fire Team Omega exchanged glances, a mix of pride and humility on their faces. Thank you, Chen said finally. It's been an honor to be part of this. Yeah, O'Brien chimed in, her usual bravado softened by genuine emotion. Who knew accidentally blowing up a microwave could lead to all this? Washington simply nodded, but the slight smile on his face spoke volumes. K-Thax's tentacles waved in a gesture of affection. The honor has been ours, truly, and who knows? Perhaps one day you'll return here not as guest lecturers, but as full-time faculty. I have a feeling the galaxy is going to need your particular brand of innovative chaos for a long time to come. As if on cue, a distant explosion rocked the campus, followed by excited shouts in at least 12 different languages. K-Thax sighed, though his eyes twinkled with amusement. Duty calls, it seems. Fire Team Omega, care to join me for one last adventure in interspecies crisis management? Chen, O'Brien, and Washington grinned at each other, then at the Admiral. Wouldn't miss it for the world, Chen replied. And with that, they set off towards the source of the commotion, ready to face whatever impossible, improbable, or just plain ridiculous situation awaited them. After all, that's what humans did best, turning chaos into opportunity, one exploding experiment at a time. As they walked, O'Brien's voice drifted back on the wind. Hey, do you think we could weaponize that explosion somehow? I've got some ideas involving rubber bands and hot sauce. The sound of K-Thax's laughter, mingled with Washington's long-suffering sigh and Chen's enthusiastic brainstorming, echoed across the campus. It was, many would later say, the sound of the future being born, bright, chaotic, and full of possibilities. And somewhere in the vast expanse of space, the cosmic egg pulsed with amusement, wondering what other surprises its most unpredictable children would come up with next.